Welcome to Portals of Perception and to Current Openings. What the world doesn't quite get yet, episode 8, a conversation where David Price, Francis, and I explore what is conducive for us at the frontiers of the human experience. And today we are continuing to open the human predicament story as we bring the focus to the human energy problem, the internal human energy problem, how and why it gets fragmented and depleted, and what are the consequences when we humans get energetically depleted. David is a spiritual teacher and a transformation expert, helping individuals and groups improve the quality of their lives and relationships. David, welcome.
Thank you, Aviv. Good to be back with you again, getting into current openings number 8. Yes, gathering power as it goes.
Yes, and you have been on a writing retreat for a couple of weeks, so how are you?
That is true. Well, I was staying at a resort, which I realized is a place originally was entitled to resort things. So that's what I've been doing. It's been a retreat, so it was a bit of a treat, and a resort, so it was a bit of a sorting. And I was able to move forward on the writing project that I'm on, which is I've got a 4th book on the way, and looking forward to that coming out hopefully within the next little while. So that's what I was at, and it was a good time for. I like to think of it as enjoyment, and the origin of the word enjoyment, when we're joined to something.
Well, one of the things about going on a retreat is that wherever you go, you bring with you your internal program and you bring with you your energy system. It actually is a lot easier to curate a beautiful setting for the retreat than to rewire the internal program and the energy system. I discovered earlier on my journey, when I took myself on several retreats, that on some occasions they produce more pressure and more stress, and on some occasions catalyzed a kind of a crisis experience. And it took a while for me to learn to know how to pace myself and calibrate and facilitate expectations and the flow that I wanted to create. And so I've had to become wiser about managing energy, managing flow, managing my psychology, because again, I tended to produce intensities. And then I'd come back home and Sarah would say, "So how was it?" So if I said to her the truth, which was that it was a disaster, there would be one problem. And if I told her, if I made up a story and said it was great, but I didn't have the goods and the substantia to show for it, that would create another problem. So I've learned that when you endeavor to be transformative to your life, to your process, to your energy, to what you are trying to do, you, one way or another, you're impacting the people around you. And that probably is a topic for another episode sometime.
Yes, relationships, there is a dynamic to speak about in so many ways. Yeah.
So you obviously, you're by now very experienced in, as you said, the resort and the retreat part, and you know how to manage that.
And yet still it presents its challenges, as always. I did move locations at one point, and I did not take into account the electromagnetic interference. I didn't realize it was a place where cruise ships came in and I didn't realize how big they actually are when you see them up front. And when they arrived with their radar and all of the people coming off the cruise ships and everything else, you could feel the electrical disturbance that would create. So there's always the cross currents of what one is not expecting to deal with. There's the plan of what one's going to deal with, and then there's the cross currents that move across that and in different ways interfere. And so handling those cross currents is a major part of being able to go forward. It's a well-known analogy, but the tacking analogy is such a good one. And the cruise ships did bring it to mind that if a ship is going from, say, London to New York, 95% of the time it's off course. it's only 5% of the time it's on course, but it just keeps tacking. So in the end, it gets to where it's going. So I think that's a great analogy for living. There's the intention, and then there's the pragmatic action of dealing with what's actually happening on a day-by-day basis.
And what you're describing there is a good segue to what we will open today with the energy problem. So there we are. We are already beginning to nudge into the space of today. Let me offer a brief recap, as we like to do, in terms of what we addressed in the recent conversation when we focused on the knowledge problem. So 4 key ideas that I'll harvest, and then let's see what would you want to harvest in addition. First, we focused on the realization that we've been conditioned away from the natural ways of knowing. And as a result, we are not as in touch with our natural intuition. Huge, big problem. The second idea that we explored was that we've been indoctrinated into privileging what we call the sclerotic classroom packaged knowledge. It's like packaged food, right? It's rather than natural food. The beauty when our granddaughter was here with us last week was there are some natural berries around the area, so she actually gets to see where the berries grow, and we go and pick up with her some berries, and it's right there fresh. We don't have that very much in most education system. It's mostly sclerotic classroom packaged knowledge, and as a result it numbs, it deadens our faculty, and we're often weaker and not as vibrant and vital in the natural perceptive faculties as we can be, as we ought to be. The third, building on that, was that we said that we feed ourselves tremendous amount of junk knowledge food. And as a result, we are fatigued even more in the perception and the connective faculties. And what we also said that as a result of all that, we have highly educated people, highly competent and talented people with advanced degrees, with little true self-knowledge and with little or no access to themselves, almost at all, with no pathways to appreciate and understand how to manage their emotions, how to manage their energies, which is one of the things we're talking about today. And because of that, we see that when we are genuinely and honestly reflecting on the educational experience, these core fundamental aspects that ought to be part of the knowledge of a life, how to manage one's energy, how to manage one's cycles, how to manage one's emotions, these core elements of personal knowledge, of self-insight, are left out of our education, which brings us today to have to talk about the energy problem. But anything else you would lift to our awareness from the journey with the knowledge predicament?
My understanding of the word education in its origin is it comes from educare, which apparently is to lead out from inside. So the idea of education, going right back to Plato, apparently, is leading out what's already there, bringing out what's the natural genius of the person. And so if you get 30 children in a classroom, which was the case when I was growing up, and then they organize, let's say, a running race. Well, every one of those 30 children has got a different inner genius. And then a teacher presses the trigger, 30 children start to run, and they classify winners and losers. And that was one experience that was across the board in education. But someone who's coming in 29th, what they really loved was playing the violin. Somebody else who was coming in sort of 30th was wanting to do something quite different. I came bottom of the class quite a few times in some things and top of the class in other things, and none of it really had any relevance. So much of modern education has become forced knowledge from the outside in. So kind of pushing in like this, rather than inner knowledge, bringing out the genius of the person, in which case you've got 30 winners. They're just winners in different things, rather than the top 5% who are so-called good academically, which mostly means they've learned to be what I called in the Dr. Wu stories, an obedient sponge. So they're able to absorb and then regurgitate what they've absorbed and do it very well. I never had one class in feeling, how to feel or what feelings are for. Feelings was something you kept off the rugby field. That was feelings. And so it's a very lopsided, I think that's a good way to say it. So in certain things, memorization, learning dates, facts, learning the classics. But when it came to the range of what the human system is capable of, quite minimalistic. And so without blame or attack or anything else, it's just assessing what the reality of the situation is like. And what would come back economically is, well, there's not the resources to help every child to develop their own unique gifts. Well, then we might want to look at human society and its importances and think, well, maybe that needs to be nearer the top of the list, because that would lead to new futures. So that would be a reflection on the process from the inside story of this particular life.
And you're reasserting a core thread for us here in the predicament evolving story of how the education system is an expression of the economic model that developed during the Industrial Revolution, and how much of that already implicitly carried this idea of privileging the outside rather than embracing the natural, intuitive genius that you are talking to. And as we continue to unfold the human predicament story, we will also increasingly be inviting with it the next phase of what we are looking at, which is the human promise and the human proposition. And we cited time and again that part of that story involves the summoning, the reactivation, the release of that genius that you are describing. And that in fact, as much as we love the Olympics and the gold medals in the Olympics, we are entering a time where we need each person to produce the gold nugget that they can bring. Some of those have high celebrity value, some don't, but they may, in a different circumstance, be just the key to unlock a solution or a challenge that we are looking at. So with that, let me bring two other premises that we established earlier that begin to nudge us into the energy conundrum, the predicament of the internal human energy system, and then ask you to build on this and instantiate for us why and how would you tell the story of the human as an energy being. The first is really something we established earlier in this series, which was the idea that energy is truly the currency of the universe, that in fact the universe is energy. And I believe in today's context, we will say that the universe is made of many kinds, many levels, many natures of energy. So that is a premise we're bringing forward from earlier in the conversation when we talked about the planetary program, and we said the program was there as a universal, innovative blueprint to help the living systems conserve energy. So that was something we established earlier on. Today we are going deeper into what is this profound currency of life that we call energy. And then the second premise, which in a way we just touched, which was central for us in the journey into the knowledge problem, was the realization that different kinds of knowledge, they contain different kind of energy. Framed another way, we could say that every knowledge that's presented is sourced in a different quality, in a different quality of energy, what you will sometimes describe as a different vibrancy or a different vibration that carries as the carrier wave that brings that knowledge. And this is why we can assert that sometimes, as you said, when you just consume knowledge from the outside, it deadens, it dumbs, it shuts down the natural capacity of the human. And on other occasions, when you are engaging with transformative, enlivening knowledge, you get switched on, you get activated in sensitivities and capacities that are otherwise switched off. So we are asserting in this that every knowledge exists within a certain frequency range, and brings a certain energetic properties. And therefore, as you already suggested, every feeling, every thought, every idea, they each carry certain energy potential and energy dimension. And this is why we are about to now go deep into this idea of the energy conundrum, because as we said, we take in so much junk food knowledge and also so much junk energy that's not natural for us. So I kind of seeded somewhat the end of what we're saying, but I'm asking you now to take us back to basic and establish. So how do you explain, or how do you frame in the first place this idea that the human is an energy being? Being part of the universe, the human is an energy being, and as such, the human is a crucible point of many different kinds of energy. Where do you begin this exploration?
Well, I think beginning today, because it's always beginning in the now, a new question turned up. What do we call a human with no energy? And I thought, well, a dead body. That's what a human is without any energy whatsoever. And even then, there's a process of decomposition, which is certain kinds of energies leaving. So we compose and we decompose as human beings, right? But a human being with no energy input, you could say the closest thing to it is a coma. But when you go beyond that stage, we move into the process we call death. So death is the departure of the energies that keep us alive. So I think that's a good place to start. Starting at the end, it becomes obvious at that point. So we have 5 major energies that enable us to continue to process. We're processing, we could say we're processing machines, but we're more than a machine. We're a biological engine. But like with any engine, it takes fuel to keep it working. And we have 5 fundamental fuels. I know we touched on this earlier, but a brief recap of those 5 fuels in an earlier current openings. We have what's been called earth fuel, which is our physical nourishment that we take in. And we function according to the quality and quantity of that nourishment, whether too much or too little, or high vibration, high enzyme, physical food, or low quality, as you call it, junk food. So that's our first fuel. The second fuel that as human beings we have to live is liquid. And without liquid, we can last a lot longer, a lot shorter amount of time than we can without the physical, or as has been known in previous times, earth food. And liquid is water food. And without that, we last a few days, but that is clearly not as material as the physical. So that's our second necessary fuel that we draw energy from. Our third, we're both doing it right now, is breathing. This one we can do without for such a short period of time that we can do a practical. We could show this on Zoom. We both take a deep breath and then wait. And then we'd see both of us slipping sideways as we sort of pass out from lack of oxygen. So that's breathing. That's our third fuel, or air. And then there's the fourth fuel, which is light. We've got light coming into our eyes. It's actually coming in through our skin. There's many, many more vibrancies in light. And they say heat that there's three fuels, in light. Well, there's many, many more than that. And they're coming in through our eyes, through our skin. We're receiving fuel from light, and also then directly from what I call the energy worlds, which is the fifth fuel, the quintessence. It's where we get the word quintessential from. The fifth essence, which is the quint essence. The fifth essence is exactly what you're saying about, say, knowledge. Every thought can only exist because it has an accompanying energy. There's an energetic law that you cannot have energy without a little bit of matter. You can't have matter without energy. So although in my business I call it energy worlds, there could easily be an accompanying business called material worlds, because you can't have the material world without the energetic, and you can't have the energetic without the material. So when someone says, well, you matter to me, it means there's so much energy transferred that it's become matter. So we have these expressions which tell a story, like the atmosphere became electric, and look at language. The really big moving words. I mean, you can say to someone, bring me a bucket of water, or can you bring me a bucket of tea? Okay, bring me a bucket of carrots. Yes. Bring me a bucket of love. And I look at you like, what? Or bring me a bucket of hope, or bring me a bucket of inspiration. And these are the big words, the power words, and they don't describe physical things. When people are speaking with each other, the emphasis on I love you and the energy transference, that is evoking the apparently invisible. When people go to church and they pray, they're praying to the invisible. So we live between two worlds. We live, as I see it, with the visible, the matter, the invisible, the energetic. We need to understand about both. And potentially there's a third vector, which is the purpose or the direction in which we travel with both worlds. So I'm not saying exclude matter to the point of concentrate on energy. Energy calls for material expression, and matter contains energy. So the two of them absolutely travel together. But in our modern time, we've become so focused upon the material that we've kind of forgotten somewhat about we don't put sufficient focus on the energetic. And I think it's very useful and important that we look at that energy predicament today.
So the first thing you establish are the 5 fuels. Then you describe that those 5 fuels, they're actually spread along a continuum, and you describe the matter and all the way to rarefied energetics. And in the way you're describing those, it's clear that these are not just two opposites. These are rather ends of a continuum. What we talk about in matter, well, it is there because, and is accessible because it still contains some energy potential. And equally, when you describe as refined energy as you may choose to describe, those are very rarefied matters. So we talk about them conceptually as two worlds, but in actuality, we're describing a continuum, and the 5 foods that you are describing, they are spread along this continuum. And what you now finally started to develop when you talk about hope and love, and then you can also put next to these words like anger and frustration that also release a lot of energy. So this is where I'd like you to give us the next step forward. So how would you describe and give us an entry into the different natures of energy? For example, the idea of fine energy and coarse energy, or sometime you'll talk about it, I know, as high or low energy. What's a way to begin to enter that consideration?
Well, I think of it as a bar. Like if we had a bar in front of me here, you'd have the low end of the bar, as you said, or the coarse end, and then refining. There's a saying of the alchemists, all can be done by refinement. It's an ancient saying, but it's very, very true. So at the low end of human behavior and human expression, we find toxic energy. We find energies which actually are more toxic than anything that all of the rest of organic life can produce. Never mind an octopus firing ink or a skunk producing a bad smell. The human is able to produce a concentrate of toxic energy, which is lower than anything else on Earth, because we have the added power of consciousness, which means we're doing it by deliberate choice. And so we can add extra power to it. So when we get jealousy, we get revenge. What jealousy was, what did Shakespeare call it? The green-eyed monster that eats itself, right? We get certain natures. Interesting, he put the color green with that, which would be a very dark, murky kind of green energy. We got murky, toxic energy down the low end, and we get beautiful, clear, shimmering energy at the high end or the fine end. A good analogy I find is the aquarium. Like in Japan, they have great reverence for the koi, the goldfish that swim at the top. Well, those are the fish that like the light. They're closer to the illumination. And in our description of human behavior, we get words like enlightenment, illumination, the illumined, and we see pictures in religions like of Jesus the Christ or Shiva or Buddha. They always have this beautiful glow around them. And then I remember seeing in Toronto, there was a painting of a Buddhist temple, and you had the person who was dealing more with the sort of the finance and stuff. Not that it was wrong, but there was no glow, and there was kind of a crumpled face, and it was like this, and it was very distinct from the Buddha look. So different energies bring different effects on the human face over time. That's how it turns from energy into matter. We get this lovely expression I learned in America. Under 30, you have the face God gave you. Over 30, you have the face you made you. That was, of course, before plastic surgery took a hand, right? So we get this inevitable convergence of the two worlds. And someone who has been pickled in that lower toxic frequency starts to develop certain language patterns, certain ways of going on. And we get now the term narcissist or narcissism. And that's someone who is beyond, we all have moments of selfishness. I don't think I've met any human being who can say, I've never had such a moment in my life. But someone who's dedicated to being selfish and is always all about them, that's where they drop down into the lower energetic properties. Because there's always an agenda, there's always manipulation, there's always what's in this for me. Whereas we start to, as we get higher, we get more into more altruistic properties. I personally call it the shift from ego to geo. And why is that? Because ego is all about me. Take the same letters and just readjust them. Language is amazing that way. We've got GEO. Geo is the beginning of geography, geodetics, geomancy. And geo is the name for the planet. So we go from personally based to a bigger picture view, and we start to think about and feel for other beings and people and organic life outside of ourselves. This quality called empathy, which I look at it, and it's not based in its history, but I think of it as emotional pathways. You know, if we've got empathy, we've got pathways that are open to walking a mile in someone else's shoes. We can start to bring in and feel and resonate with some of their thoughts and feelings. If we're entirely inside our own shell, our own kind of egoistical shell, we develop literally what's called a thick skin. And that means we just don't resonate or really feel or think about too much what other people are experiencing, except in as much as what can it bring to us. And that's where we get that more updated term, narcissism. But I've been working quite a bit into what does that really mean and what's its significance. And even inside that it has levels.
Yes.
Going from, let's say, oblivious, which is like the baby stage, person just wants to call attention to themselves, through manipulative, through destructive, all the way down to like a megalomaniac who wants to change all of society to reflect them, put their picture everywhere. You know, it's the same pattern all over the planet. Their image goes up there, and then other people have to sort of bow down to that particular person's image. That's narcissism to the extreme. So that's a very low-level toxic energy. So in the energetics, you get this range from very fine, beautiful, illuminated energy to very toxic energy that can even produce toxic effects very rapidly in other people. Animals tend to run away from that energy if they can. And other people, unless we've developed energetic sensitivity, we may or not be alert to it. So there's a lot packed into all of this, of course, together.
Yes. So the core idea you are presenting is you're describing a bar in which there is a high end that contains the refined, illumined, bright energy, and at the low end there is a toxic and coarse energy. And you're making there an important radical distinction, which is that because human life has this extra, which we talked about, consciousness, that aspect where the frontier of the creational development still occurs, it also by reversal means that human life can sink to a level and coarseness that's more degenerative than we will find in the natural worlds. So when we see in the natural worlds, along the natural food chain, one animal attack and consumes another animal, that's part of the theater of life, as gruesome as it may look. But what you're describing is that when a human chooses to, for example, apply cruelty and find joy and the exhilaration of cruelty and those other properties that perhaps will join that act, such as revenge and so on, that represent on the bar of energy, in terms of coarseness and refinement, something that's even lower than what you would see in the natural worlds. So that's a radical observation. And I'd ask you now to describe how would you bring into this early description that we are offering in terms of energy, the range from dense physical to refined energy and the bar from coarse to illumined energy. Where will you bring into this the consideration of the energetic view of health and illness? And I know this is a broad topic. We may choose to do a full conversation about this some other time. We would be remiss if we didn't seed some of that awareness in this conversation. So where would you bring the energetic view of health and illness into the picture?
It's a great question. Well, I think the dynamic of health, let's take an external analogy, and let's take something which I think all listeners will have awareness of. Let's take a piece of household equipment like a refrigerator. If the refrigerator is working within the bounds of its electrical current and its model, it produces a nice hum, it's working well. If we suddenly see it shaking and acting differently, then something's amiss, something's gone awry, and we know that there's something not right with that. All right, so every human design machine needs a particular current. I'll give a better example. An inventor that I'm working with at the moment as a client, he is working with major machinery and working with three-phase wiring. So there's three-phase wiring, and that means that there's you could call it, there's a three phases where they're meant to alternate in a fixed rhythm. So it goes, you could say red, blue, white, red, blue, white, red, blue, white, and it has a particular timing with it, and it has a particular synchronicity with it. Now, the machine started to blow up. So he's like, what's going wrong? And what he came to is that it had gone slightly out of the phases, and it was producing a harmonic that was actually then causing disruption in the machinery. So he needed to go in and get special equipment to read the harmonics of what was going on. Having done that, he's been able to resettle and sort the current so that his machines are again working well. So he's kind of going, now that's worked. So I thought of that, and I thought it's really interesting in relation to the human, because the human runs on electricity. And what's the evidence for that? Well, let's take even a quote by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes. To me, one of his most telling quotes toward the end of his life, he said, "Electricity is life." That was one of his quotes. And it's the mystery of what electricity actually is. I'm not sure if I've ever told this story before, but my wife, Joanna, her father actually worked with Einstein. So they actually worked together. And together they wrote a book called The Evolution of Physics, which is still available today. Now, there was a story that she told me that is meant to be a true story. What can you say? There's so many stories about Einstein. But apparently he was doing an oral examination of a student. And the student came in, a high-level student, and Einstein kind of was getting a little bored, I think, and he put him a test question. He said, "What is electricity?" And the student went, "Oh." And then he went, "Oh." And then he went, "Oh, Then he said, "Oh, it was on the top of, I knew it yesterday. It's on the tip of my tongue, Professor Einstein, but I just can't quite get it." And then Einstein looks at him and says, "What a pity. Yesterday there was one person on the planet who knew what electricity is, and today there's nobody." Which is just a great story. True or not, just a beautiful story. So this peculiar substance called electricity that Tesla was fiddling with, and if we look into Tesla, who of course is becoming a better known name now, but the origin of his work on electricity was he actually saw a blue flash around a cat. It didn't start with him thinking it through. It started with him actually seeing a kind of energy. And then he's like, what is that? And how does it work? And where does it come from? And maybe we can tap into it. And he was looking at tapping into the energies of the universe. So all of our equipment, I know we'll get to this when we look at external energy, but all of our equipment that runs on so-called electricity, we don't make that. It's a universal property that gets sucked in through turbines and other means, gets pushed down some wires, and then you and I get charged for it. So it's a very interesting process.
So you're describing, you're grounding us that the inroad to appreciate health and illness in the human case through the lens of the human energy system is initially in the example you offered there, where when a machine, in the case of the inventor, somehow was not able to maintain its harmonics, its inner equilibrium, it became malfunction.
Yes.
In the human case, you are saying through that analogy, when we are departing from the natural harmonics of how the different parts of the human organism are meant to run, the natural energy that is there to run the liver, the kidneys, the lungs, the spleen, the heart. These are all internal organs, each of which they run on a particular frequency range, and the whole human orchestra is meant to produce harmony of those different automated parts. And as we've talked extensively, and when that foundation is running well, it's supposed to provide fantastic supply of energy to the brain mind part that can go after acquiring new energy through new knowledge. Yes. And what you're describing is really what leads us to the first predicament. I know you were started to explore the relationship between the internal human energy and what we see in the world around us, and we want to get to that in a minute. But I want us to insert 4 predicaments, and I want to ask you about each of those. And in a way, you already seeded it. The way we framed in our exchange the first predicament is that it is the fact of the continual erosion, the continual fragmentation in the context of what you were describing, the continual breakdown of harmony that people suffer from. So, two questions. What is this fragmentation or erosion or the breakdown of harmony? What is the evidence of it? And actually, three questions. What is it? What is the evidence of it? And what are some of the byproducts?
All right.
That, yeah, please.
Well, if his machinery is running on three-phase wiring, and I believe there's part of ours that does as well, but I'll put that to one side for now, can think that we actually operate on five-phase wiring. So let's go to the Chinese system, where they talk about the 5 elements, and link that up with the alchemical system with their 5 elements, 5 angels. It's the same root, which is the earth food, the water food, the air food, the fire or light food, and the energetic. So we can go out of harmony in any or all of those 5. So if we were to take any one of those, we could cause disruption in our human health and well-being with any one of those 5 dynamics going out of alignment. As an example, take the movie Super Size Me, where the man went and just ate nothing but supersized burgers and fries for a period of time. That was him disrupting his natural harmony through the earth food. If somebody goes to drink polluted liquid over a period of time, they're going to disrupt their system through the liquid food. If someone starves themselves of oxygen, or if you're taken too far away from a source of full spectrum lighting, that's where in the northern climes now they have special light boxes to emit full spectrum lighting. They found that brings greater harmony and benefit to the human system. So we can cause that erosion and fragmentation through that would be environmental reasons. So let's take, for example, then the 5th food, the energy food, electromagnetic interference. I felt it with on the resort when those big ships came in with their radar functioning. That was something that had with it a disruptive aspect. So anybody who's lived right next to or near a major power generating equipment will know that. If anyone who's held a cell phone up to their ear and found their ear burning, will know that that's a major environmental factor that they're bringing right close to their most sensitive equipment, which is their brain. So therefore, there's wise steps to take to reduce that kind of disruption. So these are environmental reasons. Economic, let's take the example of a food desert in a town in America, a so-called food desert, where fresh produce doesn't even get there. And so a person goes into the local store and they've got a choice between different kinds of packaged foods that have been highly processed and have very little energetic, direct, enzymatic food that is nourishing to the system. So that would be, and there's an economic reason, which is, can the person afford to find the higher level, more nutrifying foods? So then we've got cultural and media reasons. So this is where we get to the fact, not an idea, but a fact, that different forms of music, different forms of entertainment, different books, they actually contain energetics. So if someone's spending their day playing Mortal Kombat 7, and they're spending their day on a video game shooting imaginary other people, that is producing toxic energy. It's highly stimulating. Like, this is the brain-body conundrum. It's highly stimulating to the brain, but to the body, it's actually receiving toxic energetics from brain level. So that then produces disharmony in the whole system, in that our entire 5-element body-brain system is, as you said, designed to produce high-level energetics into our brain. Also, you could say into our heart center. So our feeling and our thinking are designed to have good high-level energetics to work with. But if they keep getting introduced to toxic, highly stimulating but toxic signals, it actually is putting a form of poison into our system. And this is where it's been a bit of a shock to certain circles when I've been teaching this, when I've said, well, most of the damage in the world is being done by highly positive people. And they look at me like, what could you be talking about? Being positive is everything. But being positive about what is the crucial question. Because if someone's positive about producing the best-selling violent video game on the planet, well, they're being positive about a highly destructive agency. If they're being positive about how to bring about a greater level of empathy, compassion, understanding on Earth, well, then they're being positive about something highly constructive. So this is where, to me, the way we're using our brain in the body-brain conundrum needs to get put with that bar of energetics. So if we're pulling in energetics from the high end of the bar of energy, then we're able to produce both a harmony within us and also produce energy which is harmonizing out into the world. But if we're connecting into the low end of energetics, then we're bringing in stuff that is toxifying to us and also can be toxifying to others. So how we're using the equipment is a key part with the human. The squirrel doesn't have this option, as we saw in our planetary operating system, but the human does.
So you already framed both the first and the second predicament. The first predicament is this idea that many people continually suffer the fragmentation, the erosion of the well-being, the intactness of their energy system. And you framed that there are environmental reasons, economic reasons, cultural reasons, such as that we live so much in our heads, that we are separated from the natural cycles of life, that we develop compromising habits, and you landed there on the energetic pollution and toxicity, which really frames the second predicament, which is that we consume a lot of energy that's not good for us. That's what we call junk energy food. And so I'd like to ask you to there just bring to, again, even greater clarity the juxtaposition of how would you describe a suboptimal diet, and you just gave an example of some video games that would produce one energetic result, but what, for example, on the other side, would be an optimal energetic diet?
Well, everything exists on a scale in that sense. So an optimal energetic diet would be working through the 5 fuels. And so if we started from the bottom and worked our way up, we'd be looking at refining our physical diet to be producing the best results for ourselves that we could. We'd be looking, as an example, at organic, fresh produce that we're actually eating and having sensitivity to what our systems are calling for. At the level of liquids, we'll be looking at refining the kind of water that we take. We'll be looking at the pH balance. So we'd be looking to try and be able to assimilate the energy from the liquid that we're drinking. With the element of air, we'd be looking to be able to live in a place where we can access some clean, fresh air. As my mother used to say, go out and get some fresh air. Don't just sit in the house. Right? And also go out and play in the sunlight. Don't just stay indoors. Go out and play in the sunlight. This would be the 4. I mean, the research is coming in very strongly about even the fact of going out in the morning and experiencing 10 minutes sunlight, direct sunlight, brings massive benefit to our brain and system. So I think of the idea of the sun salutation in yoga. It's not a posture. It is as well, but it's the idea of going out into the sun, being in the sunshine. And there's nutriment comes with the sun. So this would be structuring our life for maximal nutrition at all 4 levels. And then in the 5th level, it would be being aware of what we're introducing ourselves to. So something about our eyes, it's very interesting. They give us the word yes, the E yes, because you can only say no to something after you've seen it. You see something, oh, I don't want to see that, but you've seen it. So there's what do we introduce our eyes to? So somehow we've got this concept. I know it's something you've touched on previously in our talks, but we've got this concept of washing our body and having good hygiene in our physical system, but not so much the idea of having brain hygiene. What do we introduce to our mental system? We understand about dental plaque, but what about mental plaque? Right? Which is curious, one letter difference. We go from our teeth to our head, go from dental to mental. And if we look even at, let's say, music, if we're going to be listening to the signals that live within a music such as heavy metal, right, or Megadeth is one of the names of the groups, right, and the certain signal that comes with that, it has an impact. If we're listening to Mozart, it has another impact. And it's not to be in terms of judgment, like, taking the moral high ground, or this is better than that. It's saying, well, everything produces a result. So there's something which has a finer result. And this is why now, of course, they're producing CDs of Mozart for babies. Help your baby's brain development with Mozart. Well, what is that? What is that? That's an energy that's inside the music that's found to help generate certain circuits in the brain. But that music is energetic. They're not opening the brain and inserting Mozart. It's coming in through the ears. And then the energy is causing certain formations in the brain, which are found to be a more beneficial order than raise your baby on Megadeth, or raise your baby on Kiss, which would then be taking the young brain and wiring it into a very different kind of energy signal. So I look at books, movies, thought patterns, philosophies. They're all containing different natures of energetic. And some of these energies are very beneficial to our system and inspire us and bring us inspiration and bring us hope, and bring us joy. And others can be, we call it going up or down, don't we? They can be downers. They can take us into thoughts of desperation and ennui, as it was called, with the works of Sartre and the like, sort of existential nausea, which I've learned that's great. Someone wants to have that, great, but I don't want that. Thank you very much.
So in the way you answered and made the distinction between the suboptimal, toxic, unhealthy energy diet to enhancing, replenishing energy diet, you already also framed what we call here predicament 3 in the series of human energy predicaments. Because what you're describing is that as a result of being separated or divorced from healthy diet, we are also displaced from the natural instinct and from the natural intuition and from the inner natural programming of getting to know what is good for us and what is not good for us. So it's a problem within a problem. And as a result of that, we are not so well trained, not so well programmed in terms of having access to our own energy, to the capacity to know what's good for us and what's bad for us. Not only do we take in a lot of energy junk food, we lose the inner discernment and inner calibration to know which energetic food is good for us and which is not. So it's a problem within a problem. Anything you'd add to frame this secondary or tertiary now predicament 3 inside this?
As you said, it's a compounding problem. That as we get further away, as we're brought further away from ourselves in a way, that we get less and less able to discern what that inner natural genius needs for its best nutrition and its best advancement, which would be actually the best for us and the best for the humanity as a whole. And we get more and more embroiled inside of secondary, tertiary dynamics that take us away from that. So we're kind of drawn away from ourselves. So we end up making choices not based upon what's best for us at core, and they're kind of illusory choices. We get spoiled by too much choice. I think that was a line in a Joni Mitchell song. So we're standing in Starbucks and we might be making a choice between 23 different kinds of things they can put in our coffee, but that's a long, long way away. It's an apparent choice, but it's not a real choice. The real choices come back to, well, what's my purpose? What am I targeting? What am I aiming myself at? Not so much according to what the world offers me, but according to what's arising from within. And that's something I see where genius appears. It's like the person gets driven from the inside, and regardless of what the world offers them, they keep going at the thing that they're caused to be doing from the inside out. And then everything else becomes secondary to that. And that to me is the root of what a real education would be about if we could get to it.
You're describing that part of where we are heading later in the human promise and the human proposition has about it this idea of being and living a purpose-tethered life. And once you have a dimension like that as part of your natural preoccupation, it brings online the natural intuition, the natural intelligence of being a human living entity in this field of opportunities, guided by this natural intelligence and natural intuition of life. But we are not ready to go there yet. I want us to still address the fourth predicament, which again we touched as well, which is the idea that we are surrounded by energy robbers from within and from without. So problem one, we talked about continual erosion and fragmentation and disharmony in terms of our energy. Predicament two, we talked about taking a lot of energy junk food. Predicament three, we talked about how as a result of that we lose the inner calibration to know what's good for us. So we no longer have the natural guidance, the natural intuition. And add to it predicament four, the various energy robbers. What would you enlist in the range of the energy robbers of the human energy well-being and vitality?
Oh boy, there's a range. Well, let's take the example right there that I was giving about standing in Starbucks and trying to work out which kind of coffee you want. I've seen people standing there and they go like this, and then they make their choices. Well, with every and every time that I see someone's left hand go to the back of their head, it's caused by a contradiction, I find, between two different energies. One of which is, well, shall I say yes to this? And the other is, am I going to say no to this? And when two things rub up against each other, it causes contradiction. So one of the biggest energy robbers is what I call, is really the idea of being caught between two polarities. Shall I, shan't I? Should I, shouldn't I? Ought I not? This is a massive energy erosion that happens inside the system. So the less friction we can cause, just like with the less friction we can cause, the smoother that we can run, the more energy we have toward what it is we're endeavoring to do. So that would be one example of an energy robber, which is getting caught up in choices that really are not material to our core purpose. So that would be an energy robber. Another would be dealing with other people who are purveyors of toxic energy.
Yes.
Whether they mean to be or not. So if they're conscious, deliberate doing it, which I would drop at the lower end of the bar, or just because they're somehow like obliviously selfish and they suck energy into them. This is what's been turned in the new age into the idea of energy vampires. Well, really what that is about is a person who is always looking to be bringing extra energy into themselves from whatever source they can get it. They've kind of lost contact with their own natural wellspring of energy, and they're pulling in the energetics of other people. So that would be another source.
So
yeah.
So So then there is a whole range of energy robbers. They include worries, they include stress, they include, as you gave in the example, indecision. They include the wrong kind of insecurity and self-doubt, and they include people that suck the life out of you. So, and you also hinted that part of the human proposition and the human promise is rediscover natural harmonies, and that inside the discovery of natural harmonies, there is this prospect of living a life with increasing flow in the various aspects and domains, engaging life as a dance that brings in an increasing enhancement of flow and well-being. That's part of what we are seeding into the story of the human promise and proposition. Now, before we bring then some seedings of how will we address these 4 predicaments that we just listed, we want to bring one more dimension into the conversation, because we talked today about, brought the focus to the internal human energy system. And we talked about how those 4 predicaments, they are part of the factors in the continual depleting and erosion of the various natural capacities that we have. And we don't want this series to be the series of doom and gloom. We have a purposeful intent in introducing those challenges and those predicaments to really set the stage to also then assert that as the size of the problem and the challenge grows, there are also new energy potential and new energy sources that are coming online to help address that when we are able to renaturalize. So, but again, I've said I want us to introduce one other aspect, which is this idea that there is the energy, not internal to the human, but everything that we're surrounded by, and the fact that we are operating in a global economy that runs on energy, and all supply and all demand and all production and all consumption, all of which runs on all of those different spaces of the economy, they run on energy. And what we are proposing, that there is something totally out of whack, totally out of balance, totally on that edge of extreme exhaustion and depletion that occurs in the exterior energy worlds of the economy around us, that mirrors and is a reflection of the internal human energy story, and that those 2 stories evolved in parallel over the last 200, 300, 400 years, some of which we told in an earlier set of conversations about the human predicament. Is there anything you want to ground us again by way of seeding? This is a conversation that we will need to come back to, and it's a space that's articulated powerfully by other people. We would want to bring it and center it inside the human predicament story. There is a reason to seed it today to demonstrate that the exterior imbalance is a mirror reflection of the interior picture. What would you say to that?
That's a fascinating argument. Well, one thing that I'd point to is that the depletion in the human internal energy systems, go into any convenience store, just at a practical level, and up on the counter, go into a garage, go almost anywhere these days, and up on the counter, just as you leave, there's energy supplements, there's energy bars, now there's energy drinks. It's increasingly all about how can I get enough energy to last through the 4-hour sort of energy drink. How can I get through the next 4 hours, the next 5 hours, get a shot of energy from the outside? Well, that's saying that there's a missing energy from the inside. So that's a fascinating feature. I do like to see how it's turning up in daily life in terms of the current openings. And partly why staying inside the predicament. I heard another saying from Einstein this week, somehow he's been around this week, which was that when he's presented with a problem, he said you spend 95%, you need to spend 95% of your time inside the problem because it's too easy to get to a shallow answer. So you want to be inside the problem longer than you think you need to be, because then solutions start to present themselves in the other 5%. I found that really fascinating because like we're trained to be quickly jumping to an answer of convenience. Oh, all we have to do is we just need to produce solar panels, or all you need to do is take this whatever lion's mane mushroom and it will improve your mind, or just take this pill. And it comes to be about these minimalistic apparent solutions which are not really solutions, and that the real solutions mean staying inside the predicament, as you were saying, and actually starting to work through, well, it might mean realigning an entire way of being, and that then produces what appears to be the solution. May be much simpler, but it's not just an external one shot of something. It's an actual recalibration of how we go on. And that is much more how I feel in terms of transformation. It isn't a matter of taking a particular pill or taking a particular substance. It's a matter of re-looking at the foundations, the fundamentals of how we're living individually and also collectively, but not jumping to the promise. So it's very wise.
Just to capture the thread there, what you're describing is that part of the predicament, the cultural paradigmatic predicament, is how we became addicted to the easy, fast solution, the easy, fast food, the easy, fast sources of energy. And again, how much that is mirrored by the paradigm of the entire macroeconomic paradigm of modernity, where the modern economic theory that is propagated by the leading economist in the world, this entire story is operating, you could say, inside a false, a distorted, could even say a fraudulent paradigm, because, well, the entire economic story of our success over the last several centuries is based on two big lies. I'd like to frame a small big lie and then the big lie. The small big lie is that about half of the energy invested in humanity and most of the energy invested in the more precious, more important part of life is not expressed in the economic equations. When my daughter-in-law is raising my granddaughter and investing with her love and patience and all those precious properties, what you earlier framed as the big energy words, love and such. When she exercises those with her, those are not expressed in the economic equations. The consumptions vectors of the toddler is expressed in our consumer-based economy. But the majority women, there are also some men, but majority would be women, that are raising our children and grandchildren and future generations, which we will say time and again are the most important part of what humanity can do, which is to raise healthy, robust, sensitive, compassionate, intelligent, enlightened human beings. All those investments, they're completely outside of the economic equation. It's a half of the global economy is invisible, and we don't have any way to evaluate and express in the equation the economic value, because it's the equation is economic rather than creative, and in the context of the bigger story of humanity. So that is what I call the small big lie. And it's relevant to the story we're telling today about the energy problem, because we are chunking out or leaving out of the way we appreciate life and the economy, which is an expression of life. We're leaving all that most precious, most important part out. And the big lie is how the entire modern field of economics was developed on the distorted premise that did not integrate on the energy side, the millions and millions of years that this planet invested in storing solar energy in the form of oil that we found in the early stages of the Industrial Revolution, and is fueled this economic miracle. But we are burning through this energy and only measuring and equating in the economic equation what it takes to extract the energy, not what it took to actually planetarily create or capture that energy that we are running quickly out of. So I'm saying everything we described earlier in terms of how out of balance is the internal energy system of the human is mirrored by this distorted energetic equation that powers an economy that is blind to half of the labor, which is raising the future generation, and is blind of all that powers the economic miracle that we have experienced over the last 4 centuries. And somewhere this century and in the coming decades, we are running out of runway to operate on this enforced growth paradigm of increased GDP powered by increased energy consumption. And that is so much the mirror of what you're describing in the convenience store, where we are running to check out of the store, and on the way out we grab a bunch of energy drinks and energy bars that where we consume more and more, that will last for less and less time, and is so much of the story of the modern economic miracle that is literally running out of runway.
Yeah, it's really well said. And when it comes to energy, I think of it, there's the current energy. When we go to sleep at night, we receive a charge of energy. And because we say sleep tight, and then in the morning, a person's tired, they're run down, they feel I need to go and rest, and then they got more energy in the morning. Well, that energy doesn't come from their food, it doesn't come from their liquid, it doesn't come from the air so much, it doesn't come from the light, it comes from energetics. We directly get plugged in. Just like you plug in your cell phone, it gets charged overnight. You go horizontal, you close your eyes, you get a fresh energy charge for another day. That is the natural energies of the universe. That is universal energy working through the human, and we're designed to run on that stuff. And we get a certain allowance every day that comes through. And I think by parallel with the economy, that at the moment we're using stored energy fuel. And as you said, there's going to come a point where they'll be like, oh, we can't get at any more stored energy fuel. We've just about run out. And then we'll be back into or forward into the natural situation of working with the energy that's coming through the universe to us on a day-by-day basis. Now, part of the human proposition, hopefully, is that there are many people working on technologies to enable us to draw more from that energy, day-by-day current energy coming through the universe. That's what solar power is. It's today's energy. It's working with the energy arriving today, not depending on the last 4 billion years that the planet for whatever reason that she decided she wanted it, it's always an outrageous question, but I always wonder, why did the planet want to do that? It's a naughty question, but that is going to, as you say, run out. And we'll be in the situation of working with what we can access on a daily basis. And that is a great place for an individual human being to be in also. What can we work with on a daily basis that lifts us up, inspires us, brings us new energetic connection, and causes us to wake up the next day with more energy than we had the day before? And that is possible, rather than be always needing some kind of energetic fix, which leads us to addictions, which leads to many other problems we've touched on in the brain-body conundrum and other matters, where people turn to toxic substances to get through the day. And when we're wired in to the daily connection, which is kind of a nice name, the daily connection, then we don't need to be looking to add toxic substances. We hold with what we're receiving and gradually refine it and elevate it. And I think this is part of our Future Promise series.
And so we are blending this with several pragmatic and practical offerings. The first is the human predicament story that we are unfolding is a way of creating and introducing awareness, following the Einstein brief of spend first 95% of the time inside the problem, because when you do, you will create in yourself the petitional energy for those natural intelligence capacities that will come online to help you bring the 5% solution. So that's the first thing we're doing. We're creating awareness. Secondly, you have just mapped again, and throughout several things you've said, there is an invitation to reground in our natural system, in the way you offered to become more aware with the way we consume each of those 5 foods, and how we become more intelligent about the value of sleep and making the daily connection and the nightly connection with cosmic energy such that we are replenished and recharged. And ultimately what we're describing is something that I stumbled on when at the age of 11, 12, I was competing long distance running professionally, semi-professionally, nothing was professional, but I say professionally because I got up 5 mornings at 5 a.m. before school to run. And what I discovered, even before I understood truly what was the meaning of the difference between aerobic and anaerobic work, just scientifically or the depth of knowledge came later, I was discovering aerobic and anaerobic not as a concept, but as an experience on the inside out, by pushing to the threshold of pain and finding that internal equilibrium where I could stay in that zone for longer, where I could run not on energy stored, but I could find that internal unique zone, the aerobic zone, where I could actually run what maybe outside of that zone felt completely impossible. And then the big thing was, how could you produce that on game day when you're competing without letting the tension catch up to you, and actually induce and enter that aerobic zone such that you could get to peak experience. All those concepts, I understood them conceptually later, but they became early in my life as an 11, 12-year-old, a discovery inside the natural intelligence of the body, of the human system.
Yes.
And so much of what we're describing is bringing that idea of aerobic flow, which is work with the energy you consume on the run rather than burn the stored energy. And when we do that, we are in flow and we are able to produce what would otherwise seem impossible. Any closing thoughts from you about just grounding this with some tips and pragmatic guidance about how can we address those four predicaments to better manage our energy, to not suffer the fragmentation and the erosion of energy, to be better centered in ourselves, better listening, better attuning to the energy potential, and selecting a better, wiser energy diet?
It's beautiful. Well, I think the perception that we are energy beings helps, that we think of ourselves as energetics first and then materials second helps. And we are both, of course, but we tend to be these days so much rooted in the material that the energetic comes in as a secondary feature. Whereas I think to turn that upside down is very smart. So we start to think of managing our energies. It's a curious story. Winston Churchill, odd name to bring up. But at one point, there was a reporter who said to him, how do you manage all of what you do on a daily basis? How do you do it? And he just turned around and gave 2 words, with that symbol, of course. Just said, energy conservation. That was the shortest possible answer, with conveying what it was he was talking about, which is energy conservation. So there's now trainings in the world to do with, even as an example, when you pick up a chair. I think this is inside the Alexander technique, and there's many techniques out there now. But the idea, when you pick up a chair, apply the amount of energy it actually takes to pick up a chair. I learned this one time. I was brushing my teeth and I was thinking about something intently, and I snapped the toothbrush. And then I'm like, this is ridiculous. How much energy am I putting into that action of brushing my teeth to actually break a toothbrush? So it was way out of balance, the two things. So that gave me a further understanding about, well, try and apply the energy to something that it actually calls for. That would be honoring. I think that's a good word there for that. That would be honoring your energetics, is giving something the energy it calls for. Try not to overbear it, and at the same time, try not to underbear it or underwhelm it. So to be realizing that one has a natural flow of energy, as you say, and that we can use that energy allowance in purposeful ways. I think this about emotional energy, thinking energy. How much energy do we waste in thoughts that are really not relevant? But even more than that, how much energy do we waste in feelings that are not relevant? Because feelings usually, in my experience, take at least 10 times, probably 100 times as much energy as thoughts. So if we can develop our willpower in this regard by developing our will not power, that is, what do we say no to, gives us more scope for what we can say yes to. We start to work with our mental power to use our energies in a more purposeful way. And I think one actual tip is, try not to, my mother tried to teach me this, and it's real good energy advice. Try not to take to bed things that with unclarities. Try and take 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever, before sleep to adjust the state, so that when you surrender to sleep, you're actually connecting in the best you can to a nice, clean, clear energy charge. So you're not carrying over too much of the day into the sleep process, which then produces interfering dreams and all kinds of other contradictory states. Again, we'll get to this in the energy transmission. But
So 4 tips. Number 1, remember you're an energy being, and start there, because when you bring that mindfulness, that awareness, you look at everything different. Number 2, energy preservation, energy conservation. Try to give to whatever you do exactly the energy it needs, not more and not less, and develop that sensitivity and that attunement to give whatever it is you are doing exactly what it needs. Number 3, attend to all the energy intake factors of your life, as you spoke earlier about the 5 foods, and truly the quality of your sleep, because the health and the completion of your sleep is the foundation of all the energy system. That's all on the replenishing side. And then finally, I'd add, remember that when you regenerate your higher energetic nature, you serve yourself, you serve the people around you because you impact them, and you serve the universe at large. You become a better agent of energy in terms of what you receive and what you transmit to the world. So you are an energy redemption engine rather than the opposite. You are regenerating and redeeming energy potential rather than exhausting and toxifying energy. So if more of us can try to do that into the people around us and the environment around us, that's a part of the human proposition and the human promise.
100%. Yes, absolutely.
Yes. To be continued. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you, Aviv. Great to be with you. Bye for now.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.